great by-election against Count Binface. That's made him a laughing stock, hasn't it?
He's not a big face. He's a comedian. He is part of the establishment.
Count Binface, part of the establishment. Give me a break.
Yes.
The voters that we spoke to, sort of shine was coming off Farage, but also people who already were on the track of wanting to support him weren't really put off by some of the noise around it.
The Burnham arrival is the one that's really shifted the narrative. It's put the pressure back on Farage because Farage now has someone who is equal to him in the communication stakes.
So are you thinking about reform beyond Nigel Farage? Hello and welcome to the Fourcast. I'm Matt Frei. Things change fast in politics, don't they? Only in May, remember May, reform had swept the board in the local elections. Nigel Farage was being talked about as a future Prime Minister, and Keir Starmer was in the process of losing his job, in part because of his woeful polling against reform. Since then, though, the scandals have been piling up. Police and parliamentary investigations, donations from a convicted fraudster, a by-election against a bin, and of course that £5 million gift, as Farage calls it. And as reform slides in the polls, some of the party are starting to think the unthinkable. Life after Farage. So, what's going on in reform land? Have they reached their natural plateau? Have they peaked? Or are predictions of Farage's demise and reform's demise premature? Well, to talk through all of this, I'm joined now by the journalist Tim Ross from Politico, the Reform Board member and longtime Farage associate Gawain Towler, as well as Claire Ainsley from the Progressive Policy Institute. Welcome to you all, making time for you, for me rather, in the middle of a summer holiday and a very busy August. Okay, let's start with you, Tim, then. How bad is this for Nigel Farage on reform?
Well, if you look at all the factors, Matt, that are kind of ranged against Farage at the moment, there are some significant problems he's facing. Someone I was speaking to described it as a perfect storm that is engulfing the Reform UK leader right now. He's got this by-election to fight, which he was hoping would be a massive fight against the establishment parties. Labour decided not to fight him at all, so he's up against a bin. You've got even immigration numbers going in the right direction now, and so they're not as high as they were a year ago. And you've got, most of all, I think, Andy Burnham now as Labour leader, who is communicating in a way that no Labour leader has perhaps been able to for, perhaps since Tony Blair, and can, in fact, legitimately, I think, claim to be the one guy who can take on Farage at his own game as someone who can seem to sort of embody that popular discontent against the establishment and land his messages well with the public. So there are a lot of structural problems facing Nigel Farage right now.
Okay, and it's early days for Andy Burnham. He's in a bit of a honeymoon period. Let's see how all this looks after the budget in November. Claire, has any of what Tim just said been reflected in the polls so far?
Well, we have started to see some movement in the polls from that really long period where we had reform in the lead. It does feel like Andy Burnham becoming Prime Minister and this sustained problems that reform are having is having some impact on voters. But crucially, we are nowhere near a general election. And all of the factors that led to reform going forward are still really, or most of them are still kind of in play. So I think we should, as Labour people, I will obviously welcome Labour going into the lead. But I think, as everybody knows, you sometimes have to take opinion polls with a pinch of salt and really make sure that the new Andy Burnham-led government is doing the hard yards to make sure that the change that Keir Starmer promised is actually delivered before the next election.
Okay. Gawain Towler, you've been waiting patiently while listening to the other two. You look ruffled by the wind, but I suspect you're unruffled by what you heard.
Totally unruffled. Look, I think ever since Burnham became Prime Minister, we've been expecting a crossover point where Labour will rise in the polls, particularly seeing as he did it in such a clever way as not to have scrutiny for the first 8 weeks. So currently we're being governed by, bags of pork scratchings and bread rolls. And he's very good at it. I'm not going to suggest otherwise. He is very good.
But pork scratchings and bread rolls is the kind of thing that Nigel Farage could embrace as well, isn't it?
Well, indeed. And I was thinking about what Tim was just saying, this on what you were mentioning, this perfect storm. I'm reading Ashcroft's biography of Farage right now, mainly because I'm in it, of course. But what I found, I just got to a point of 2007. I remember it well. The BNP, a party on our right, was cutting into our votes. Farage looked tired. There was a couple of questions about propriety and about finances. There were people in the head of UKIP asking, is it the end of Nigel Farage? This was 2007. His obituaries, political obituaries, have been written time and time and time again. And I suspect we all talk about resilience in this modern world, and everybody has to have resilience. If you want to see an example of resilience, political resilience, then you look no further than Nigel Farage.
But the stakes are also much higher now, aren't they, than in 2007 or even in 2016. He is in Parliament. His opinion poll ratings have been very high. He, as I said earlier, he was talked about consistently, until quite recently as a future prime minister. I mean, there's a lot to lose for him at the moment, isn't there?
There is. But other things I think are interesting. If you look at the Makerfield by-election and then the big Manchester by-election, though it had a tiny turnout, you've got Labour bouncing back a bit, absolutely. But you've also see the Tories becoming a regional party and not that region, being beaten by Restore in both Makerfield and across the entirety of the metropolitan area of Manchester. That's a devastating indictment on the Conservative Party. And so, as has just been mentioned, it is early days for Andy, for Mr. Burnham, the Prime Minister. It's very early days. He's not actually done anything yet. He's made a bunch of vibey sound bites, which sound good. And there's a couple of things that I entirely agree with, but he hasn't done anything yet.
Well, that's not entirely fair either. We haven't got anyone here from his camp to defend him, but I mean, he has made he's made quite a few policy announcements. I mean, they may or may not work in the end, but it's not just words. You have, displayed an amazing ability not to win by-elections of late. So that doesn't help either, does it?
Well, and you're quite right. We've had 5 by-elections that we haven't won. However, in almost every single one, apart from that slight anomaly in Aberdeen, we've won we've come second each and every time, vastly improving our 2024 result. And I think that's not bad in itself. I think we tripled in Manchester in comparison to our previous attempt. Aberdeen is fascinating because the Tories did well for the first time since 1967. They won a by-election in Scotland. However, they won it on a anti-net zero ticket, something that they borrowed from our cupboard in the last 6 months, and we didn't really have a campaign up there. So, and there's a lot, should we say, as was mentioned earlier. We now control 32 councils. We're actually doing the job. We're saving money. We're not cutting services. We're doing, I think, a very good job. And it is that we are taking seats and councils off Labour and the Conservatives. And so, that was a high watermark in May, absolutely. Burnham's come in. They are rising in the polls right now.
I want to get back to you, Tim. I mean, there are lots of moving parts here, aren't there? There's Burnham's performance. There's the promise of his early, first few weeks. There's the 5 million quid gift to Nigel Farage. There's Restore UK. If you look at, getting back to your perfect storm analogy, that Gawain obviously doesn't like, but it is a bit of a storm. When you get back to that, what are the most important factors in that storm that damage Farage more than the others?
It's hard to disentangle them all because you can't necessarily do that without some very detailed polling work and some detailed kind of focus groups. But I would say the biggest change has been, I think, the question around that donation and whether that's really a fair enough thing to have accepted the 5 million quid. And then Andy Burnham's arrival on the scene, I think, is the other huge change that we've seen in recent weeks. And they really have made a difference. I mean, Politico's polling partners at Public First, we had a poll out a few days ago looking at Nigel Farage's approval rating. And among the general public, it's down 5 points from net -16 to net -21. And then if you look at 2024 Conservative voters, who are I'm sure, key target group of interest to Reform UK, it's down even further. It's down 15 points, so 3 times as big a fall over that same sort of period from May to the end of July. So there are some, like I say, big problems here. I think the Burnham arrival is the one that's really shifted the narrative. It's put the pressure back on Farage because, great communicators, even his starkest opponents will tell you Farage now has someone who is equal to him in the communication stakes, I think.
So, Claire, you've got a new prime minister, a brand new prime minister, yet to be really tested, on the difficult terrain of politics. But he is talking about policies in a very approachable way. He's talking about things that might make a difference in people's lives. Now, you could call them gimmicks, and some of them may well be, but, he is addressing stuff that matters around the kitchen table. Mr. Farage is busy, apart from his announcement the other day, which was about using the Royal Navy to stop small boats in the Channel. He's really busy just either defending or not defending the 5 million quid personal gift he got from a very rich crypto billionaire who lives in Thailand. I mean, that's not the kind of conversation you want to have as a politician, is it?
Yeah, he's not in the place I'm sure he would want to be. But I would say that once they manage to move past this by-election, which has obviously been called at his choosing, it's not provided the platform that Reform wanted. But I would say that those early signs from Andy Burnham show that he and his team know that the fundamental issues that have driven support away from the Labour government, and they drove support away from the Conservatives, of people feeling like there isn't the change to the status quo in the country that they want, those issues have not gone away. So I think that, of course, it's important that Farage has scrutiny on him. But the thing that Labour minds need to be really focused on is actually on delivering and communicating well how they are making fundamental change in the country. And I think we've seen a good start from Andy Burnham, really focusing on young people, on their prospects, on the jobs market, on giving people breathing space right now in terms of bills. But I think they know they've got an awful lot more work to do. So I think they'll be encouraged by the early polling, but they're not going to read too much into it at this point.
Is the 5 million quid, is that a real problem? I mean, I've spoken to a lot of Reform voters or potential Reform voters who are not that bothered by the 5 million quid, and I've spoken to others who are. What do you think, Claire?
I've spoken to voters in the last sort of month or so since Andy Burnham was just becoming Prime Minister, and did a piece of research for Progressive Policy Institute with Deborah Mattinson, Keir Starmer's former Director of Strategy. We spoke to working class voters in a large poll across the country, but we did focus groups in the North East and in Kent. And a lot of those people were people who voted Labour previously, but weren't intending to again. And views were mixed. I definitely think Farage is already kind of a Marmite figure. Some people really don't like him. Others really do, and they can kind of look past some of the furore that is around now. The 5 million quid definitely did come up, but I'm not sure it was necessarily a deal breaker for people who were already moving in that direction. But it was enough to give people doubts about people who kind of want the Labour Party to get better. I would also say that they weren't dismissing the Conservatives either. They certainly were taking Kemi Badenoch more seriously than I think some of the commentary does. I think that's a watch out, and it's exactly what we're hearing Gawain say, is that the competition for Reform is who is the dominant party on the right of politics.
Gawain, back to you then. First of all, on the 5 million quid, do you wish that Chris Harbon had given that money to you and not to Nigel Farage?
Of course.
Okay.
I'd be able to afford Wi-Fi wherever I was, Starlink or something.
No, but hang on a second. Okay. Let's ask it seriously then. I mean, this is a problem, isn't it? I mean, it's a problem that maybe it isn't worth 5 million quid investing in, because it raises all sorts of interesting and difficult questions about double standards and so on.
Honestly, Matt, I've never been in a position where 5 million has even been a pipe dream, so I wouldn't know. But the point, I think, was made very well just now. If you look at the Survation poll in Clacton itself, you've got people, everybody knows about the 5 million quid. Everybody. And yet it is not driving votes.
That's also Clacton, though, isn't it? I mean, Clacton is, Farage turf.
No, but I mean, he was on 46% of the general election. He's now on about 72. A lot of people who voted, they're feeling that, hold on, this whole sort of week in, week out, a new story every week, some of them very, very slight, and some of them more serious, beginning to look like an establishment attack rather than a serious piece of scrutiny. All politicians deserve scrutiny. I wouldn't suggest otherwise. However, it's beginning to look, oh gosh, look, it's Sunday, it's another time to attack.
Yeah, can I just ask you though, Gawain, if it's an establishment attack, or that's the way it's being perceived in Clacton, How come Nigel Farage has been so quiet about it in the last 5 weeks? I mean, he's been in a witness protection programme on the £5 million. You would have thought that if he relishes that fight, he would engage in it more. You know, he was embarrassed by it, wasn't he? Let's be honest.
I don't think embarrassed. He was just trying to go through the legal aspects and all the rest of it. There's quite a lot of detail that has to be dealt with at that point when it's being chased up. But be that as it may, if you saw him at his press conference yesterday or the day before, the questions came in about the 5 million, about Rupert Lowe, and I've not seen him as relaxed and as enjoying it as I have for quite a good few months now, not just the last few weeks. I think the bottom line is, we've been here before. He is a man of great resilience. I think that the underlying problems of the state are such that even with a shiny new prime minister who is very good at media, those realities will keep. I mean, it's very interesting. You position as this outsider who's, yeah, okay, he's an outsider. He's been in Manchester, but his entire cabinet are insiders, and everybody else on the team is insiders. You're not going to be able to do I'm not from these parts, I'm from the North shtick for very long when you're actually running the government. And I think there's a strong likelihood the wheels will come off.
Just a quick one on the great by-election against Count Binface. I mean, that's made him a laughing stock, hasn't it? I'm not talking about Count Binface, I'm talking about Nigel Farage. Again, as an advisor, hang on a minute, as an advisor, would you have said to him, bad idea, Nigel, don't do it?
No, because I think he's trying to point out that rather than being convicted by a group of 10, 12 people in Westminster, he wants to be convicted by the people who elected him. And I think that's a fair position. No, when it comes to Count Binface and the laughing stock, he's not a big face. He's a comedian who works for the BBC. He is part of the establishment.
Count Binface, part of the establishment. Give me a break.
Yes. Oh, come on. He's got awards. He's got awards for working with the thick of it for the BBC, left, right and centre for the last 15
What
years.
establishment is that?
Oxford-educated comedian.
Yeah. So if he is establishment. Excuse me. If he's a member of the establishment, so is Nigel Farage, who went to Dulwich College and has lots of rich friends and hangs out in Belgravia.
Sort of thing.
I mean, come on.
Very different sort of thing.
Listen, mate.
An anti-establishment politician from an establishment background. This guy works in the establishment. He is a BBC comedian.
All right, come off it. Okay.
Nigel is the laughing stock amongst people who
Count Binface is not here to defend himself, so we'll leave it at that. Okay, Tim,
you're a laughing stock amongst people who have always laughed.
He's supposed to be a laughing stock. He's a comedian. We're talking about your leader.
No, I'm talking about Nigel. Yeah. You laugh at him, but you've always laughed at him. And people,
I take him very seriously. He could be the next prime minister. Tim, let's talk about Restore UK as well. I mean, so, there was this wonderful article in the Financial Times the other day saying that actually the splitists used to be on the left in European politics, and now they seem to be on the right. So you've got Reform UK. On the right of Reform, you've got Restore UK, which sounds remarkably similar. You've got, Kemi Badenoch's Tory party actually trying to fight the culture wars on Reform's battleground and maybe not winning as well as they thought they might. So what's going on there, and how much is that a problem for Nigel Farage and his party?
Well, there's a debate about how much Restore Britain cost Nigel Farage in terms of the reform campaign in Makerfield. I think certainly they took a few votes there, and that was an issue. Is that going to be replicated more broadly? I mean, Gawain can give us a view on some of those concerns potentially. I think if Nigel Farage has certainly shown over the years that he's willing to do deals, if you like, in order to get the kind of result he wanted. He stood down a whole bunch of candidates across the country in the 2019 election because he wanted to make sure Brexit got done. So he wasn't challenging the Conservatives in a whole bunch of seats then. Is there the potential for a deal with Restore Britain that would stop the two right-wing parties, hard right, far right, however you want to describe them, from fighting each other and then letting the centrists, either the Tories or probably maybe Labour, come through the middle between them, and that's we'll have to see. I think certainly what Burnham has done on the other side of the equation is, if you like, start to bring in the very early days the left more together in a way that perhaps the Greens were posing a challenge to the left before. I just want to go quickly back to one point which was coming out of what Gawain was talking about, and that's the anti-establishment vibe that I think is absolutely central to all of this. And yeah, you can argue one way or the other whether Burnham or Farage is actually a creature of the establishment, and to an extent they both are. But they are trading heavily on a very, very strong cynicism and an anti-establishment instinct in the electorate. And I think that is where the next election will be won and lost, really. Who can embody that? Who can appear to be most closely aligned with those voters? And one thing that struck me out of a poll that Politico did with Public First quite recently was just how many Reform UK voters actually think that Andy Burnham understands the problems they face. And it was 44%. And that struck me as quite a high number. And it was higher than the number who said that Burnham didn't get their problems. And that was around 38%. And if you can mobilize those people, you can more or less do anything, I think, in politics as it is in Britain at the moment, and not just Britain. It's a common kind of dynamic that you see across Europe and also obviously in the United States.
So, Claire, is Andy Burnham parking his tanks on Nigel Farage's lawns, and is he doing so effectively?
Well, I think the lawn or the battleground is basically the same, and I think getting that right is really important. And that battleground is the towns and suburbs all across the United Kingdom that are where the elections are going to be fought. And therefore, what I'm really pleased about, what I've seen Andy Burnham do, is acknowledge that that is where he's going to have to fight reform. And that's why he believes he can win, because I think he sees that and sees that people understand that he does get the problems that they face. And I think that's partly what's rattling Nigel Farage. I think you can see him a bit more on the back foot where you haven't seen that before. And again, I say that is a start, but it's certainly not the end of the story. The bigger question is going to be, can Andy really push forward on the issues that are really bothering people? And they are about costs being so high and continuing to rise, about immigration, about safety and the sense of control over their local neighbourhoods. Those are the sorts of things that I think Andy Burnham has already said he'd prioritise, but also give people that hope for the future. And actually, one thing you haven't heard from Nigel Farage very much recently is much talk about policy or what they're going to do. There's some of the announcements feel as though they've been repeated. So I think in the end, you are going to have a battle, not just over communication style and personality, but who's got the agenda for the future. And I certainly think that Andy Burnham has gone out with a strong push so far to say it's him.
Gawain, I was really rather amused to hear the other day on a rival podcast, someone was asked, I think it was Ziad Youssef, who your party's spokesperson is on matters of health. And the name they mentioned was Nigel Farage. And I have to say, Nigel Farage is many things, but I don't have him down as a spokesperson on health issues. Not just because he likes his fags and his beer and his claret. Anyway, the point is, my question to you, Gawain, is, you just don't have enough experts. You don't have enough people who know stuff about the things that people care about. You're finding it difficult to find decent candidates in by-elections, which is one of the reasons why you're losing them. And also, it's essentially still a one-man show, with Nigel Farage. And if he's in trouble, the party's in trouble.
Well, clearly it's no longer a one-man show. That had been accurate about 2 years ago. I want to go back a little bit as well. In the last 3 weeks, the left hasn't been vociferous. However, over the last year or so, you've got Your Party, you've got the Green Party. A lot of the increase in Labour support, if you look at the crosstabs in polling, is people swinging back from the Green Party to Labour. It's not so much people from Reform going back to Labour. I think that's important to note. But look, I think it's been announced that at conference we're going to be announcing a bunch of new spokespeople. We do have, I'm going around the country at present, having meetings left, right and centre, and some of the sheer ability amongst the people I'm talking to who want to stand for election and going through the process is, I am really, really happy. I can't tell you. I'm doing a lot of this. Every week I'm going up and down the country doing this. And what's really nice is the range. You have everybody from senior bankers through to brickies, all coming forward, train drivers, so on and so forth, many doctors, many people from the NHS, and people that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, would have thought immediately, these are people who are going to go to join the Labour Party, are going to be representing Labour.
Would they join Reform without Nigel Farage? Is the party prominent without him?
I think, again, a year or so ago, you've got to remember, Richard Tice took the party to 12 points in the polls before Nigel Farage got back. So we were already on a base of 12. Looking at all the rubbish or stuff that's hit us in the last few months, the fact that we're still bouncing along in the early 20s, we're just up again this week on YouGov. suggest that our base is now around about 19 to 20, 21. Then
That's not
if you
enough to
take
win an election.
Farage, no, it's not. But there again, nobody else has got enough to win an election. So hey ho. And we're a long way away from an election, according to what Burnham has said. There's many months to go, and the realities of politics will come much harder than the slew of policy announcements, many of which are very positive and many of which are very effective. But there's a difference for me making a policy announcement and me delivering on that policy.
I want to hear your answer to the question that we asked at the top of the podcast, which is, is there a future for reform beyond Nigel Farage? Is the party ever so quietly and discreetly looking beyond him? Because his own personal ratings have gone down. He is, as you said, Marmite. He's toxic to some. He's very positive to others. And I guess, that's always in the balance. So are you thinking about reform beyond Nigel Farage, Gawain?
Well, I suppose, the government's announcing its plans for 2050. I suppose we could. No, look, we're not looking anywhere beyond Nigel Farage right now. But you've got to remember that in our party now, as key spokesmen, you've got people who were the favourites to win the Tory party only 2 years ago. So these are not lightweight figures. The Suella Bravermans of this world, the Robert Jenricks of this world, and others, and homegrown talent that we have ourselves, are serious people with serious ambitions. So the party ain't going to go away just as Nigel gets
I
hit
also
by...
remember Kemi Badenoch saying on the day that Robert Jenrick defected to you lot, you're very welcome to have him. So there we go.
Of course, she would say that.
Well, of course she would. But he's a troublemaker. He was a troublemaker for her. He might be a troublemaker for Nigel Farage. Tim, I want to get back to you then. You heard what Gawain had to say there. Do you agree with it?
Look, I think one thing is absolutely clear. Farage is an immensely successful, long-standing politician, and you only have to look at what's happened to the Labour Party over the last month to see the significance of leadership and the role that a leader can play. He launched the party, obviously. It's his beast, it's his tribe, as I think Gawain sometimes describes the supporters of the various parties that Nigel Farage has led. Having said that, why does he get this support? It's not because he is universally adored as an individual. It's because there are millions and millions of voters out there who feel the mainstream has absolutely failed them, and they are looking for answers. And so, even if Farage does disappear off the scene, and he's done that a number of times, he's walked away as a leader a few times in his career and come back, clearly, and he might do that again, who knows? But even if he does disappear, that impetus from the voters who feel like they've been let down by the establishment won't disappear. And I think, there will need to be a receptacle for that kind of a vehicle for that kind of anger, that kind of frustration. And I'm sure that, in the market that we have for politics in this country, one would certainly emerge were Farage to walk away from it all.
And Tim, as I said earlier, Farage went to public school. He's at Dulwich College. He became a trader in the city. He likes fine clothes. He walks and talks like an establishment figure, like a posh boy, but he's not seen as such. It's a bit like Trump, the billionaire from Fifth Avenue, who is able to appeal to working class voters, from the poorest parts of Pennsylvania. What is it about Farage that he's able to suspend disbelief when it comes to his claims of being anti-establishment? Tim?
I think there's something about authenticity. Maybe Claire knows more about this from looking at some of the focus groups and the polling, but I think there's one thing that Andy Burnham and Nigel Farage seem to share as political leaders is a sense that they are speaking as they see it. They are being authentic and true to themselves in the way they present themselves. And I think if you look at, something potentially really trivial, like the way Andy Burnham dresses in what he called his Manchester clothes, with the T-shirt and so on, and the way that he, does these very informal selfie videos on social media all the time, it feels authentic to a lot of people in a way that, the boring cardboard cutouts prime minister, if you had to build a prime minister out of Lego, he'd probably look like Keir Starmer. These are kind of unfair caricatures, but they're also, they carry some kind of truth to them. Some people just look like they're normal people and that they can connect with normal people and they're authentic, and other people don't.
Claire, is authenticity the most important currency in politics these days? And does Nigel Farage still have it?
It is really important that candidates are seen as being authentic and speaking directly to voters. And I think Andy Burnham has that in spades. But like,
what about Nigel Farage?
Well, I can't. The voters that we spoke to, as I say, I definitely think this sort of shine was coming off Farage. but also people who already were on the track of wanting to support him weren't really put off by some of the noise around it. That's the truth. But the really important thing about the national populace is this is happening in developed democracies everywhere. And it's happening because they have got a message. It's not just about the person who's giving the message, it's about the fact that they've got a message and they are blaming society's ills almost wholly on immigration. And they're now having to find other issues to try and talk about. And until the centre and centre left shows that it can reform government and get things done for ordinary people, then the national populace will be in business, whoever is their leader.
So, Gawain, that's interesting, isn't it? I mean, you really have to see Andy Burnham fail in order for your party and your guy to have a chance to replace him.
Well, the government has not proven itself to be superb over the last 2 years. And it's the same government, just with a different figurehead. So I'm not overly concerned. I do think that who we blame, is decades of sort of identikit politics. We don't blame quiet immigration. We blame a political class that has let the country down on a whole series of matters, not just immigration. And so the...
but what makes you, sorry to interrupt, but what makes you think you can do a better job at actually running the show?
Because most of the people that we've involved, that are involved in our party and involved in coming together to stand for our party going forward, are people who have run things, who understand what a balance sheet looks like, who've had to deal with the impact of regulation on their jobs and the people they've employed, had to sack people because of bad decision by government. That's why, because we're going to be bringing in people who are hugely experienced in a vast range of walks of life in a way that politics has not been done for decades.
Business people, you're saying?
Not just business people, as I say, train drivers, as I say, steeplejacks, farmers, all sorts, military officers, you name it. The range is colossal. I'm really excited by the offer we're going to be making to the country. This is our retail offer. And look at the people. They are superb. And they have this massive breadth of experience, diversity, men, women, doctors, nurses. As I say, it goes to headmasters, you name it. It's a brilliant collection of people. And we are going to be bringing in people with that level of life experience that sadly Westminster has driven out of the main political parties, the legacy political parties.
Tim, I can see the attraction of those people, in an election campaign, and I can see that you want to get them involved in government because they are real people with real world experiences. But are they equipped? Are they competent enough to run departments, complex machinery of government? Because that's a skill as well, isn't it?
Well, it is, of course. And I mean, we'll have to see, if Reform do take over and they fire the deep state chiefs in Whitehall, we'll have to find out whether these people really can do the job that they're appointed to do. I imagine that they will take a more pragmatic approach than that if they do win. But who knows? And I think almost the question is actually a different one. It's not quite whether they've got the experience as individual politicians or as a group of politicians to do the job of running the country. I think there is a huge chunk of voters out there who actually don't care so much about that. They are just up for ripping the system up and rolling the dice. And the people ask questions in polls. Do you respect our institutions as a country? Do you want to restore them and revive them and improve them, or do you just want to tear them all down? And there's a sizable chunk of people who are now thinking, let's just tear it all down.
And so, Claire, final word to you. If that's what it's about, if it's about a protest vote, it's about channeling public anger with the establishment, with the way things have been run for years, people feel they've been badly dealt by the people that run the country, whether they're Tory or Labour. If that's the game here, and assuming that things don't suddenly improve dramatically, then Reform still is pushing at a pretty open door, aren't they?
Yeah, that's exactly the point, is that whatever happens with the Reform leadership, whatever happens with the machinations on the right wing, unless, as Tim says, there is a candidate who is able to say, I can break that and I can change the status quo, and that is what Andy Burnham is going for, then you will see Reform do very well, because you're seeing it everywhere else. And I think that Andy Burnham's pitch is absolutely right to say, I'm the person who can do that. But the question on which all this rests is whether he will be successful in being the candidate to change the status quo for those millions of people who have been looking for it.
Tim Ross, Claire Ainsley and Gawain Towler, thank you very much to all three of you for spending time with me on the Fourcast today. Hope you enjoyed it.